This is Bodybuilding 101. Today's topic, bulking and cutting, how to do either one.
Let's go.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's go.
This,
Popular topic.
it is, and
Just like I'm going to go get a sandwich. I'm going to work on my bulking while you guys figure this out.
Yeah.
I'll get some coffee.
no, I want to talk specifically around because as you think about this, right, we've been doing this for a long time. You think, oh, bulking, cutting is very simple, but there's a lot of myths around both bulking and cutting. In particular, how you combine training with bulking and training with cutting and all that stuff. So I think this will be a good episode.
I think that there's one of the things that I thought was going to be the norm when I got into the space was like just this brilliance around nutrition and exercise programming. And it was not true. And I don't say that to insult everybody that's like a bodybuilder, because there's plenty of bodybuilders that are very intelligent, that know what they're doing, that are nutritionists. Like, so obviously there's exceptions to the rule, but it was more often the rule that a lot of these guys and girls were just not dieting properly for a show. Like they extreme bulked and they extreme cut. And there was a much easier and better approach to the whole process. And yet they couldn't figure out why each time they went into a cut for a show, it got harder and harder, and they could never bring a better version of themselves to stage. And they were until the point where they would run 4 or 5 shows like that. And I forget, there was a saying in the bodybuilding world that they call like show fatigue or something like that. And they would blame it on that, of just like too many shows in a row. And it's like, well, it's not too many shows. It's not the getting up on stage and posing that causes this. It's the extreme dieting and bulking that is causing them to hit these hard plateaus.
100%. And by the way, I know this is bodybuilding, but bulking and cutting is important to understand for athletes as well. Athletes also, and as we get into this, the same principles that bodybuilders typically are looking to apply, or the goals, I should say, that they're trying to get from bulk and cutting are similar to what athletes would get when they'd want to gain size or lose size. So athletes would want to gain size, particularly with strength. In some sports, size could be advantageous. Or if they're trying to get smaller, they're not trying to lose performance. They want to improve their performance while being smaller. So this episode applies to, and then of course the average person who wants to approach bulking and cutting, wants to do it the right way so that it's both sustainable, they don't hit plateaus, and they feel good while they do that. So bulking, just loosely, we'll define this as the attempt to gain muscle and size, typically with minimal or no fat gain, or the pursuit of a faster metabolism. In other words, bulking is the process by which my goal is to gain muscle. And I say typically with minimal or no fat gain because it's very rare where someone's purposely trying to gain body fat. Now, there's cases where this will happen. I can think back to some female clients that would come to me after dieting for too hard and too long, and we needed to gain body fat to get the hormones to regulate. But for the most part, when people say, oh, I want to bulk, they're not talking about gaining a bunch of body fat. In fact, they wouldn't need me for that. It's pretty easy.
Well, you also say minimal because it's also almost impossible to be eating in a surplus trying to gain and not gain some body fat with that.
The goal is that, right? And then the other part is the pursuit of a faster metabolism. Bulking, when I first was a trainer, was pretty much relegated to just people who wanted to get bigger. Nobody else bulked. Now we're starting to see people use bulking as a way to speed up their metabolism so that it makes it easier for them to get lean, which I think is a great approach, and we'll talk about. So bulking in this episode, and that's what we're talking about when we say bulking. Cutting is the attempt at losing body fat with minimal or ideally no muscle loss and no strength loss. So when people say they're cutting, they typically aren't trying to lose muscle or performance or strength. That's not what people are after.
Right.
So that's the goal. Now, I guess we could talk about how to do it and get as close as you can to accomplishing those specific goals.
Yeah. Also, maybe some of the common mistakes back to the original point I was making with the bodybuilding community, and I'm highlighting them because that's their sport, and so they're the most professional at it, and yet they still make a lot of mistakes. Which my point is that really highlights how much the average person who's trying to do what they basically do for a living, right? These people cut and bulk for a living or for for a hobby, and then you have the average person who is trying to emulate what they're doing, whether they're trying to get on stage or not. They're trying to emulate what these people have learned how to perfect. But the truth is, a lot of them have not figured that truly out, and we see this extreme bulking and extreme cutting. And what ends up happening is if you were to actually do, and this is why I love to always tell people to go get like a DEXA scan or a underwater hydrostatic weigh and find out your body fat percentage before you do something like this, because
the scale won't tell you.
Yeah, if you're okay with your current weight and you want to go through this process of, I want to bulk up and build some muscle, and then I want to then trim down, say for summer, and lean out, and if you end up in the same exact position lean body mass wise, so it's the same amount of muscle before you go on the bulk, and then at the end process of bulking all the way up, say 10, 15, 20 pounds, and then cutting all the way down, and you're at the same lean body mass.
You wasted your time.
Yeah, it was just like a lot of extra calories and a lot of extra work for the same body composition. And this happens all the time.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because here's what bulking is not. Gaining a bunch of body fat with minimal or no muscle gain. And here's what cutting is not. Losing weight or muscle with very minimal or almost no fat loss. And that's what ends up happening when people do it the wrong way. Let's start with diet first. And believe it or not, this is where the confusion, this is where I don't think there's the most confusion. Now, there's confusion here, but I think there's more confusion in other aspects of this. But with diet, there's bulking and cutting actually have one thing strongly in common. Whether you're cutting or whether you're bulking, that doesn't matter. You still should aim for your target body weight in protein. Both diets need to be high in protein. A cutting diet that's high in protein will burn more body fat and lose less muscle. And a bulking diet that's high in protein will build more muscle and will gain less body fat.
Now that's true, but would you make the case when coaching a client that it's even more imperative that we're hitting that or above for my client that's in a cut?
Yes, even more important.
Right, because if you were hitting your protein intake 80, 90% of the time with a few days here and there that are under, and we're in a caloric surplus, the likelihood that we're going to pare down or lose muscle in that process, saying that everything else is controlled, that stress is fine and your programming is good, we probably won't pare down and lose muscle. But in a caloric deficit and, pushing the body, right, stressing the body like that, and missing a few protein days here or there could be a lot more detrimental.
Yeah, a calorie surplus is protein sparing. So you can get away with less protein. But still, at the end of the day, if you compare two bulking diets, everything else identical, calories, everything else identical, but one's high protein and the other one isn't, the high protein one's going to build more muscle and gain less body fat in a calorie surplus.
This is actually how I used to control my dieting of bulking and cutting when I was competing. Is I really didn't move a lot of variables because I needed to be so precise with this, and I had timelines and things like that. I would when in a bulk, I was eating 2.5 cups of rice with all my meals and allowing some fats like butter and extra calories that would come from things like that. When I would go the other direction, I would pull it from carbohydrates. I really wouldn't manipulate protein. Protein would kind of stay consistent all the time. The only thing I would kind of manipulate is my fats and my carbohydrates. It would be the way I would manipulate. It was just an easy way to do it. It's like if I'm eating 5-6 meals a day and I'm eating 2 cups of rice with every single one of that, and now I want to cut, say, 300 to 500 calories out of the diet, I simply just cut those, serving sizes of rice in half and maybe a little bit less oil or butter, and now I've got a 500 calorie deficit.
And the other reason why protein is probably more important in a cut is because it's appetite suppressing. This actually might make it a challenge in a bulk. Sometimes hitting your protein targets and trying to hit a surplus of calories, and we'll get to what the surplus and deficit should be. Sometimes it makes it hard to hit a surplus, especially if you're like a skinny kid, you got fast metabolism, you're one of those people that's like a hard gainer. You're like, oh my God, I got to eat 3,500 calories and I got to try and eat 190 grams of protein. But when I hit that protein, I'm like so full. In that case, liquid protein, like protein shakes, can be quite beneficial but with a cut, it's great. Like you want appetite suppression when you're trying to cut. So high protein is like super valuable.
I remember when this light bulb went off for me as a young kid trying to gain weight. And the other kind of hack to this was too that when I was a hard gainer and trying to eat more calories and I knew I had to hit protein, I would just eat everything in sight, and that would be burgers, everything, right? And I would get so satiated that I couldn't get to my protein. I actually found eating lower calorie, leaner meats promoted me to be hungry again sooner. And it
You were
became,
prioritizing the protein and the calories. Yeah.
and so it was easier. I would have never thought that me switching over to turkey and chicken and these like leaner cuts would actually help me in a bulk. But I actually found what would happen is that I could eat that turkey or chicken, and then 2 hours later, I was ready to eat again. Whereas if I had a big old juicy Five Guys burger, I would be full for the next 4 or 5 hours. And so I had an easier time hitting my macro targets by actually eating
prioritizing the protein.
Yeah.
That's 100% what both of them have in common. The thing that's very different about both of them is not carbs and fats or anything like that. Those you could play with. As long as you get your essential fats, you could play with both of them. It's whether or not you're eating more calories than you're burning or less calories than you're burning. That's the difference between a bulk and a cut. Now, the question is always, well, how do I know if I'm eating more than what I'm burning or less than what I'm burning? The best way that I know, that we know, as of right now, is literally to track your normal diet. Don't change your diet. Track it for a week, and then you get your average per day. And your maintenance is probably around whatever that is. So you just eat your normal diet, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, whatever. Track everything on an app. At the end of a week, take your total, divide it by 7. There's your average. Now you know if you eat above that, you're in a surplus. If you eat below that, you're in a cut. And that's a good place to start.